The Arizona Territory, 1885. Under a merciless sun, Clara Whitfield stands trembling as her father's gambling debt is settled with her own flesh. The silent Apache warrior before her doesn't smile, doesn't speak, his dark eyes revealing nothing but shadows as he claims his payment. Two strangers bound by cruelty and circumstance, thrown together in a crude cabin at the edge of two worlds. She, raised in genteel poverty with dreams now shattered. He, a man between cultures, trusted by neither, haunted by demons no one could see. Their beginning was not of love but of survival. Could a woman sold like cattle ever truly love the man who bought her? Or would the ghosts of their beginning forever haunt what they might become? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Clara Whitfield had once known a different life. The faded daguerreotype she kept wrapped in a handkerchief was her most precious possession. Her mother in Eastern finery, spine straight, eyes bright with promise. The woman who had taught her letters and manners, who had read Shakespeare by lamplight and dreamed of her daughter becoming a teacher someday. That was before consumption took her mother, before her father moved them west, chasing rumors of opportunity that never materialized, before the drinking and the cards. Now, at 20, Clara rose each morning in their leaning shack at the edge of Copper Springs, a settlement too small to be called a proper town. She heated water, mended clothes, and pretended not to notice when her father stumbled home smelling of cheap whiskey and regret. Her dreams of teaching had narrowed to simply surviving with dignity intact. "Good morning, Miss Clara," Mrs. Donovan called as Clara entered the general store, the bell tinkling softly above the door. "Looking for mending work again? If you have any, ma'am." Clara kept her voice gentle, educated, the last remnant of her mother's influence. As a matter of fact, Judge Wilson's wife brought in some tablecloths needing lace repair. "Your stitches are the finest in the territory." Clara smiled with genuine gratitude. Mrs. Donovan had been creating work for her since they'd arrived 3 years ago. The older woman slid a package across the counter along with a hard-boiled egg and an apple. "For your lunch," she said firmly when Clara began to protest. "Morning, ladies." Reverend Pierce entered, removing his hat. His eyes lingered on Clara with concern. "Miss Whitfield, I missed you at Sunday service. Father was unwell," Clara said, the familiar lie bitter on her tongue. The Reverend nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Perhaps you might join us for the ladies' Bible study?" Mrs. Pierce would welcome the company. "Thank you, Reverend. Perhaps next week." After gathering her mending work, Clara walked slowly home, savoring moments of freedom. The dusty main street gave way to scrubby paths as she approached their cabin. She paused at the sound of raised voices from inside. "One more week, Whitfield. The boss ain't a patient man. I'll get your money," her father's voice slurred. "Got a sure thing lined up. Better be. Next time we won't be so friendly." Clara pressed herself against the weathered wood as two men she recognized as workers from the Silver Dollar Saloon stormed out. They tipped their hats mockingly as they passed. Inside, her father sat at their rickety table, head in hands. Thomas Whitfield had once been handsome, educated, a bank clerk with prospects. Now his face was mapped with broken veins, his hands trembling. "Clara, darling." He attempted a smile. "Don't look so worried. Everything's fine. How much do you owe, Father?" Her voice remained level despite the familiar dread. "It's nothing. Just a temporary shortfall." He rose unsteadily. "I'm going to wash up. Then I'll help you with whatever needs doing." But they both knew he would be gone within the hour, back to the saloon where he'd lose himself in cards and liquor. Clara set down her bundle of mending and moved to the shelf where her mother's Bible had been kept. It was gone, of course, likely pawned for drinking money like so many other small treasures. She fought back tears as she opened her sewing basket. Weeping wouldn't change anything. That evening, As she worked by candlelight, Clara heard riders approaching. Her father had not returned, which wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the harsh knock that followed. "Miss Whitfield? You in there?" She recognized the voice of Tom Bailey, the trading post owner. With trepidation, she opened the door to find him standing awkwardly beside a tall figure whose features were obscured by shadow. "Miss Whitfield, I need you to come with me to the trading post. It's about your father." "Is he hurt?" Alarm quickened her pulse. "No, ma'am. There's a situation needs resolving." The silent figure shifted slightly, and moonlight caught the planes of a copper-skinned face, dark eyes watching her with unsettling intensity. Clara had seen him before, the Apache who occasionally traded pelts in town. People called him Two Wolves, though never to his face. He kept to himself, spoke to almost no one, and was given a wide berth by townsfolk and natives alike. Clara didn't understand why he was here now, or why his presence made Tom Bailey so nervous. But something in her stomach nodded with foreboding as she reached for her shawl. "Let me get my shawl," she said quietly. "Then you can explain what this is about." She couldn't have known that within hours, everything would change. That her father's debts would be paid in a currency she never imagined offering. That she would leave this shabby cabin not as Clara Whitfield, but as the property of the silent Apache who watched her with those unfathomable eyes. Nakohi, Two Wolves, had not meant to be at the trading post that day. He preferred to conduct his business at dawn when few settlers were about. Their stares made his skin crawl, some fearful, others contemptuous, all seeing only what they expected to see. Savage, heathen, animal. None bothered to notice his carefully mended clothes, his precise English on the rare occasions he spoke, or the books he sometimes traded for. But his silver medicine pouch needed repair. The sacred bundle contained remnants of his past. A scrap of his mother's wedding blanket, a hawk feather from his first hunt, a smooth stone from the stream where he had been born. The leather thong had frayed, and the old medicine man who still acknowledged him despite his outcast status had warned that losing such items would sever his last connections to his ancestors. So he had come when the sun was high, hoping to trade a prime beaver pelt for leather cord and still escape notice. The trading post had been unusually crowded. Men from the silver mine celebrating payday. Tom Bailey behind the counter, watchful of the liquor flowing freely among the card players in the corner. Two Wolves had stayed by the door, waiting for the room to clear. "Double or nothing, Whitfield," a miner slapped down cards. "Your pile's getting mighty thin." Two Wolves recognized the man losing badly, Clara Whitfield's father. He had seen the daughter in town occasionally, head bent as if to avoid notice, yet carrying herself with quiet dignity that spoke of better days. Unlike most white women, she never crossed the street to avoid him. Once, she had even nodded a greeting. "I'm good for it, Stevens," Whitfield slurred. "One more hand. Your credit ain't worth spit." The miner's eyes narrowed. "Less you got collateral." "My cabin. That falling down shack?" Stevens spat on the floor. "Worthless." Two Wolves should have left then. The white man's self-destruction was not his concern. But something kept him rooted as Whitfield's desperate eyes darted around the room, finally settling on a small Bible he pulled from his coat. "This belonged to my wife. From back east. Silver clasps, see?" Two Wolves felt a flicker of disgust. He had seen Clara Whitfield reading from that book on her porch. "Ain't worth much." Stevens was dismissive. "What else you got?" "My daughter." The words hung in the sudden silence. "Pretty girl. 20. Educated. Reads and writes. Good worker. Pure too." The room erupted in coarse laughter and crude suggestions. Two Wolves' hand moved unconsciously to the knife at his belt. "That's enough." Tom Bailey's voice cut through the noise. "This is a trading post, not a slave auction." "Ain't slavery if it's for debt payment," one miner argued. "Happens all the time with Chinese girls." Not here, Bailey insisted, but two wolves saw the uncertainty in his eyes. The law was thin in the territories, and a woman without protection was prey. I'll take the debt. The sound of his own voice surprised him. It had been weeks since he had spoken aloud to anyone but the old medicine man. The room fell silent, men turning to stare. Two wolves stepped forward, face impassive. How much? He asked Bailey. $200, the shopkeeper said, eyes wide. Plus interest. Two wolves reached into his buckskin shirt and withdrew a small leather pouch. Gold dust and nuggets spilled onto the counter. Payment for 3 years of pelts and labor he had little use for. He had been saving to buy adjacent land, expanding the buffer between his cabin and encroaching settlers. Write it up, he said quietly. You buying the girl? Stevens asked incredulously. What's an Injun want with a white woman? Two wolves did not answer. His eyes locked with Whitfield's, seeing the man's momentary shame buried under relief. She's a good girl, Whitfield mumbled. Raised proper. Two wolves had not planned this, had never wanted responsibility for another life. But he had seen the cruel eyes of men like Stevens following Clara Whitfield in town, had heard their whispers about what would happen when her father finally gambled away everything. At least with him, she would be safe, federal unmolested. It was more than her father could promise. Make it legal, he told Bailey, who nervously drafted a crude bill of sale while the miners watched in fascination. We'll need her to sign, Bailey said finally. Two wolves nodded once. I will bring her. And so he had ridden to the Whitfield cabin in the fading light, the bill of sale heavy in his pocket, wondering what madness had possessed him to entangle himself with these white people and their sordid affairs. He touched the medicine pouch at his neck, newly repaired with leather from the trading post. The old medicine man had once told him that the spirits sometimes placed a person exactly where they needed to be. Two wolves did not believe in such things anymore. Yet here he was, about to change both their lives forever. The trading post reeked of whiskey, tobacco, and unwashed bodies. Clara stood frozen in the doorway, acutely aware of every man's eyes upon her. Her father hunched at a card table in the corner, unable to meet her gaze. Come in, Miss Whitfield, Tom Bailey said awkwardly. We've got a situation to resolve. She stepped inside, clutching her shawl tightly around her shoulders. The Apache man, two wolves they called him, stood apart from the others, tall and still as stone. What's happened? She asked, though dread was already pooling in her stomach. Bailey cleared his throat. Your father's in a bit of trouble. Owes some money. How much? Her voice remained steady even as her world began to tilt. $200, plus interest. Clara blanched. It might as well have been $2 million. I don't understand why you've brought me here. The debt's been settled, Bailey continued, not meeting her eyes. Mr. Two Wolves here has paid it in full. Relief washed over her, quickly followed by confusion. Why would the stranger help them? She turned toward the Apache, intending to express gratitude, but the pitying glances from the miners stopped her. There's paperwork to sign, Bailey said, sliding a document across the counter. Clara stepped forward, eyes scanning the crude handwriting. The words blurred, then snapped into horrifying focus. In exchange for the person of Clara Whitfield, age 20, to become the property of... No, the word escaped as barely a whisper. She looked up at her father, silently begging him to deny this nightmare. Thomas Whitfield studied the floor, shoulders slumped in defeat and shame. I'm sorry, Clara girl, he mumbled. There wasn't any other way. You sold me? The question hung in the suffocating air. Like furniture? He was going to hurt me, maybe kill me. Stevens and his boys. So you gave them me instead? Her voice rose despite her efforts to maintain dignity. Not to them. Her father gestured feebly toward Two Wolves. To him. He'll treat you decent. Clara turned to the silent Apache, whose expression revealed nothing. Had he orchestrated this? Coveted her from afar? The thought made her stomach heave. "I won't do this," she said, backing toward the door. "I refuse." Stevens, the miner her father had been playing against, laughed coldly. "Ain't up to you, missy. Your pa's debt's gotta be paid. If the engine don't take you, you're still collateral." His eyes raked over her figure. "I'd be happy to take you instead." The other miners chuckled, and Clara saw her future with sickening clarity. Passed from man to man until nothing remained of her. "The law," she began desperately. "Ain't no law out here that protects a debtor's daughter." Stevens cut in. "Ask anyone." Bailey at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Miss Whitfield, I don't like this any more than you do, but your father made a legal contract. The debt's been satisfied if you go with Mr. Two Wolves. Otherwise—" He trailed off, but his meaning was clear. Clara felt the room spinning. This couldn't be happening in America in 1885. People weren't bought and sold anymore. But the hungry eyes of the miners told her otherwise. Two Wolves had not moved or spoken. He simply watched, those dark eyes revealing nothing of his intentions. What will happen to me?" she asked him directly, forcing the words past her constricted throat. He did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and surprisingly cultured. "You will cook, clean, live at my cabin." Pause. Nothing more. She didn't believe him. Men didn't purchase women for housekeeping. "Sign the paper, girl," her father urged. "It's done either way." With trembling fingers, Clara took the offered pencil. Tears blurred her vision as she scrawled her name beneath her father's. The moment the lead left the paper, she felt something fundamental shift in the universe. She was no longer Clara Whitfield, daughter. She was Clara Whitfield, property. Two Wolves nodded once to Bailey. "It is done." He turned to Clara, gesturing toward the door. "Bring what you need. We leave now." Now? She hadn't expected it to happen so quickly. "But my things. I will take you to collect them." She looked one last time at her father, searching for any sign that he might fight for her, might undo this travesty. But Thomas Whitfield was already turning back to the bottle at his elbow, relief evident in the slump of his shoulders. "Clara," he called as she reached the door. "I'm sorry, child. I truly am." She did not answer. There were no words left in her. Outside, the setting sun painted the mountains blood red as Two Wolves helped her onto his horse. In silence, they rode toward what remained of her old life, and then onward to whatever future awaited her as a man's purchased possession. Darkness had fallen completely by the time they reached Two Wolves' cabin. The journey had been conducted in total silence. Clara too numb to speak, her new owner apparently disinclined. Her small bag of possessions felt pathetically light against her side. She had taken only clothing, her mother's daguerreotype, and a battered copy of Pride and Prejudice that had survived her father's pawning only because its value was sentimental rather than monetary. The cabin materialized out of the darkness, a solid, well-built structure that surprised her. She had expected something primitive, but this was sturdier than many settler homes, with a proper stone chimney and a small covered porch. Two Wolves dismounted and tied his horse to a post. Without speaking, he took Clara's bundle and gestured for her to follow him. Her legs trembled as she slid from the horse, pins and needles shooting through her feet. Would he expect her to perform wifely duties immediately? The thought made bile rise in her throat. He pushed open the door and struck a match, lighting a lamp that revealed a single room, simply but adequately furnished. A table and two chairs sat near a stone fireplace. A narrow bed occupied one corner, covered with a woven blanket in geometric patterns of red and black. Shelves held cooking implements and supplies. Everything was meticulously clean and orderly. Two Wolves placed her bag on the table and moved to kindle a fire in the hearth. Clara stood frozen by the door, uncertain what was expected of her. The fire caught quickly, illuminating the cabin with flickering golden light. Two wolves straightened and regarded her for a long moment. "You are afraid," he said finally. It wasn't a question. Clara lifted her chin slightly. "Wouldn't you be?" He considered this, then nodded once. Crossing to a shelf, he took down a simple clay bowl and filled it with water from a bucket near the door. He offered it to her silently. Clara stared at the bowl, uncomprehending. "To wash," he explained, his deep voice startling in the quiet room. The journey was dusty. She accepted the bowl cautiously, half expecting him to grab her wrist or touch her in some way. He did not, keeping a careful distance between them. "Thank you," she said automatically, her mother's lessons in politeness absurdly asserting themselves. Two wolves nodded, then moved to unroll what appeared to be a sleeping pallet. To her surprise, he placed it near the door, far from the bed. "You will sleep there." He pointed to the bed, then to the pallet. "I will sleep here." Clara blinked in confusion. "You don't want." She couldn't bring herself to say it. Something flickered across his face. Perhaps annoyance, perhaps something else. "I bought a debt, not a woman's virtue." Relief made her lightheaded. "Then why did you?" "There are worse men." He did not elaborate, but his meaning was clear enough. An awkward silence fell between them. Clara stood holding the water bowl, unsure what came next in this strange arrangement. "There is food if you are hungry," two wolves said, gesturing to the shelves. "Dried meat, corn cakes." "I'm not hungry." In truth, her stomach was knotted too tightly for food. He nodded again and removed his boots, placing them neatly by the door. Then he sat on his pallet, back against the wall, knife within easy reach. His eyes remained on her, watchful but not threatening. Clara realized he was waiting for her to settle before he would rest. Feeling awkward, she placed the water bowl on the table and moved hesitantly toward the bed. It felt deeply strange to prepare for sleep with this man watching. This man who owned her according to that terrible paper. But what choice did she have? She kept her dress on, removing only her shoes before slipping under the blanket. The bed smelled of sage and wood smoke. Two wolves reached up and lowered the lamp wick, plunging the cabin into darkness broken only by the dying fire's glow. Clara lay rigid, listening to his breathing across the room. Despite his promise, she couldn't quite believe he would remain on his pallet all night. Men made promises they didn't keep. Her father had taught her that lesson well enough. Hours passed. The fire died to embers. Two wolves did not move from his position by the door, though she could tell from his breathing that he wasn't sleeping either. They were both awake, watching each other across the darkness, waiting. Dawn's first gray light filtered through the cabin's single window. Clara realized she had dozed briefly, exhaustion finally overcoming fear. Two wolves was already up, adding wood to the fire. He had kept his word, remaining by the door all night. He caught her watching him and nodded once in acknowledgement. "There is a stream behind the cabin," he said. "For washing. I will be hunting. You will be alone until midday." It was the longest speech she had heard from him. Before she could respond, he had taken his rifle and slipped out the door, leaving her alone in the cabin that was now, apparently, her home. Clara sat up slowly, trying to process all that had happened. She was not violated, not harmed, just utterly displaced and belonging to a man she didn't know. A man who was, against all expectation, behaving with something resembling honor. For now, at least, days passed in a strange, silent rhythm. Two wolves left at dawn each morning, returning with game or fish or plants he'd gathered. Clara remained at the cabin, initially refusing to touch anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. She wouldn't cook for him or clean beyond the small space she used. Small, silent rebellions against her captivity. On the third day, restless and lonely, she began to explore the cabin more thoroughly. The craftsmanship surprised her. Tight-fitting logs sealed with clay, a stone fireplace that drew smoke perfectly, shelves and furniture made with obvious skill. Nothing like the crude structures she'd imagined savages would build. She discovered a loose floorboard near the bed, pried it up out of curiosity, and found a small cache of books. Shakespeare, Homer, a volume on natural philosophy, a medical text. Most surprising was a pair of broken spectacles, carefully wrapped in soft leather. She returned everything exactly as she found it, but the discovery troubled her preconceptions. What kind of Apache owned books? Needed spectacles? When two wolves returned that evening with a brace of rabbits, Clara watched him with new curiosity. His movements were efficient as he skinned and cleaned the animals outside. He spoke only to ask if she wanted some meat, accepting her terse nod without comment. After they ate, separately, Clara at the table, two wolves by the door, he took out a piece of wood and began carving with a small knife. His hands moved with the same precise control he brought to all tasks. "Did you build this cabin?" she asked suddenly, breaking 4 days of silence. He looked up, surprise briefly crossing his features before the impassive mask returned. He nodded once. "By yourself?" Another nod. "It's well made." He inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the compliment, and returned to his carving. Silence fell again, but something had shifted. Clara had initiated conversation, however brief. A small crack in the wall between them. The next morning, two wolves left a stack of firewood by the stove before departing. Clara stared at it for a long time before finally using it to make coffee. Her first voluntary domestic act in the cabin. A concession, but also a practical acknowledgement that this arrangement, however unwanted, might last some time. As days turned to a week, Clara established her own territories within the cabin. She kept her few belongings neatly on one shelf. She washed her clothes in the stream and hung them to dry on bushes behind the cabin. She avoided looking at two wolves directly, though she felt his eyes on her often. Weather turned cooler as autumn deepened. Two wolves brought extra blankets one evening, wordlessly placing them at the foot of her bed. That night, as wind rattled the shutters, Clara found herself watching him across the darkened room. He slept sitting up, back against the wall, ever vigilant. Did he never properly rest? In the morning, she awoke to find him gone as usual, but a small pile of late-season berries sat on the table. The gesture confused her. Was he trying to win her trust? Domesticate her? Or was it simply pragmatic to keep her fed? Clara ate the berries and, after a moment's hesitation, swept the cabin floor. Not for him, she told herself. For her own comfort. She was hanging laundry when she found the carved wooden figure tucked into her coat pocket. A small, perfect bird with outstretched wings. She held it to the light, admiring the craftsmanship. A gift? A message? She couldn't decipher his intentions. 2 weeks into her captivity, Clara discovered paper and pencils in a box under the bed while sweeping. She hesitated, then took a sheet and wrote a single line. "Thank you for the bird." She left it on the table. That evening, two wolves read her note without expression. But the next day, she found more paper left conspicuously on the table, along with a better pencil. A month passed. October brought morning frost and longer nights. They established routines that minimized contact while enabling coexistence. Two wolves hunted and maintained the cabin's exterior. Clara, gradually and with reluctance, took over interior tasks. Cooking, cleaning, mending. They ate separately, slept on opposite sides of the room, and rarely spoke. Yet communication happened in other ways. Books appeared on the table, offerings or recommendations. She wasn't sure which. Clara would find her place marked in one she'd been reading, suggesting he read them too when she was asleep or outside. One evening, returning from gathering kindling, Clara found two wolves placing a newly made chair at the table. A second chair, carved to fit a smaller frame than his own. He didn't acknowledge her entrance, but the message was clear enough. She was no longer a temporary inconvenience. He expected her to stay. Clara ran her fingers over the smooth wood of the chair back, conflicted. It was beautifully made, comfortable, a considerable investment of time and skill, a gesture that could be interpreted as considerate, or as another chain binding her to this place and this man. November brought the first heavy storm of the season. Rain lashed the cabin for 3 days without cessation, thunder cracking over the mountains like artillery fire. The stream behind the cabin swelled dangerously, and cold drafts found every minute gap in the cabin's construction. 2 wolves could not hunt. Clara could not venture out to gather the plants she'd been drying for tea. They were trapped together in the single room, the closest proximity they'd endured since her arrival. Clara sat by the fire, pretending to mend a shirt while covertly watching 2 wolves check the windows for leaks. He moved with that same economical grace she'd come to recognize. No wasted motion, no unnecessary gestures. The forced intimacy of their confinement made her acutely aware of him as a physical presence. By the 3rd day, the silence had become unbearable. Clara had read her few books repeatedly. She'd mended every piece of clothing. She'd reorganized her meager possessions a dozen times. Boredom and isolation pressed on her like physical weights. "Will it flood?" she asked, her voice startling in the room punctuated only by rain and occasional thunder. 2 wolves looked up from the arrow he was fletching. "No, the cabin sits high enough." His full response, more than a nod or single word, surprised her. Emboldened, she continued, "Have you lived here long?" He seemed to consider whether to answer. 7 winters. Alone. A nod. Clara twisted the fabric in her hands. "Why?" His dark eyes studied her, inscrutable. "Why what? Why alone? Don't your people live in groups?" A flash of something, annoyance, pain, crossed his features. "They are not my people. Not anymore." The bitterness in his voice intrigued her. "Because you live among whites?" "Because I try to live among whites." He returned to his fletching, clearly considering the conversation finished. But Clara's curiosity, suppressed for weeks, would not be silenced now. "Is that why you have books hidden under the floorboards?" His head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "You found those." It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. "I wasn't snooping. The board was loose." He set down his work and regarded her steadily. "You have questions?" "Yes. Ask them." The directness startled her. "Where did you learn to read English?" "Carlisle Indian School. Pennsylvania." His voice was flat. "The white government took children from the tribes to civilize us." Clara had vaguely heard of such schools. "You were taken from your family?" "I was 7. They cut my hair, beat me when I spoke Apache, taught me Shakespeare and mathematics." His English was perfect, his diction precise. "When I returned at 17, I was too white for my people and too Apache for yours." The simple tragedy of it struck Clara speechless. 2 wolves continued, a dam breaking after years of silence. "My Apache name is Nakohi. It means walker between worlds. My father was a warrior who believed peace was possible. He sent me willingly to learn white ways." His fingers traced the fletching. "When I returned, the reservation had been moved. My family was gone. Disease or soldiers, I never learned which." "I'm sorry," Clara whispered. He acknowledged this with a slight inclination of his head. "The white name they gave me was John Rivers. I do not use it." "But you kept the books." She gestured toward the floor. "Yes." For the first time, something like humor touched his eyes. "I kept what was useful, discarded the rest." A comfortable silence fell between them. Outside, the rain continued its assault, but the thunder had moved eastward. "May I?" Clara hesitated. "May I read them?" "Your books." 2 wolves, Nakohi, studied her for a long moment. Then he rose and retrieved the hidden cache, placing the volumes on the table between them. This one first. He selected a worn copy of The Odyssey. A man trying to return home. Clara took it carefully. I've never read it. It is about belonging nowhere and everywhere. He returned to his seat by the door, but the distance between them had diminished somehow. That evening, they sat on opposite sides of the fire, each reading silently. When Clara looked up once, she found two wolves watching her, something unreadable in his expression. "Why did you not try to escape?" he asked suddenly. "In 2 months you never ran." The question caught her off guard. "Where would I go? Back to my father who sold me? To town, where men like Stevens wait?" He nodded, accepting this logic. "And you have not." She couldn't finish the sentence. "Claimed ownership?" His voice was neutral. "I bought freedom for you, not possession of you." "Freedom?" She almost laughed. "Is that what this is? It is not a cage if the door stands open." Clara considered this as the rain drummed on the roof above them. Not a cage, perhaps, but not quite freedom either. Something in between, like the man himself caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. For the first time, she wondered if they might be more alike than different. The morning broke clear after the storm, the world washed clean and glittering with frost. Clara stepped outside, breathing deeply of the pine-scented air. The conversation with two wolves, Nakohi, had changed something between them. Not friendship, exactly, but a thawing of the frozen silence that had defined their coexistence. He had gone hunting at dawn as usual, but left a small stack of firewood by the stove and the Odyssey prominently on the table. Clara had already read the first 3 chapters, surprised by how the ancient story resonated across centuries and cultures. She was hanging wet clothes to dry in the strengthening sun when she heard the horse approaching. Nakohi returned earlier than usual, his expression grave as he dismounted. "What's wrong?" she asked, immediately sensing his tension. "The Simmons homestead was attacked last night." He secured his horse and moved toward the cabin, gesturing for her to follow. "4 dead," Clara gasped. The Simmons family had 8 children, the youngest still a baby. "Indians?" Nakohi's jaw tightened. "Mixed band. Renegade Apache and white outlaws. They work together sometimes." Inside the cabin, he moved with swift efficiency, checking his rifle, gathering ammunition. "They may come here next." Fear clutched at Clara's throat. "Why would they attack us?" "Not us." His eyes met hers. "Me. Some Apache see me as traitor. Whites living alone are easy targets." "What do we do?" Clara struggled to keep her voice steady. Nakohi crossed to the fireplace and pressed a stone in the hearth. To Clara's astonishment, a section of flooring lifted, revealing a small root cellar. "If they come, you hide here." He helped her down, showing her how the trapdoor worked. "No matter what you hear, stay silent until I call for you." The hiding place was cramped but solidly built, with a small air shaft cleverly disguised as part of the chimney foundation. Clara climbed out, dusting off her skirt. "What about you? Shouldn't we both hide?" He gave her a look that needed no translation. Nakohi would not hide while danger threatened his home. "How many raiders?" she asked. 5, perhaps 6. He continued preparing, moving with controlled urgency. "We should leave, find help." "No time." He cut her off. "And nowhere safer within reach." Clara watched as he transformed before her eyes. The quiet, contained man who read Homer became something else, a warrior preparing for battle. He braided his long hair tightly, painted 2 red streaks across his cheekbones, and strapped a knife to his thigh. When he removed a war club from beneath the bed, the weapon looked like an extension of his arm, natural and deadly. "How do you know they're coming here?" she asked. He held up a bloodied arrow. "Found this at the edge of the property. A warning, or a promise." Clara stared at the arrow, its fletching marked with distinctive red and black patterns. From your tribe. Former tribe. His correction was automatic. They want me to know they are coming. She swallowed hard. Will you fight them? If I must. He tested the edge of his knife. First, I will try to speak with them. Some may listen. Clara had never felt more useless. What can I do? Nakohi considered her for a moment, then handed her a small pistol from his saddlebag. Last resort. Only if they find you in the cellar. The weapon felt impossibly heavy in her hand. I've never fired a gun. Point and squeeze. His demonstration was brief. It will be loud. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Nakohi positioned himself on the porch, seemingly relaxed but coiled with tension. Clara brought him coffee, standing awkwardly beside him. You should go inside, he said, not looking at her. Be ready to hide. Not yet. She sat beside him, surprising herself with her boldness. Tell me about your tribe. Before. He glanced at her, then back to the tree line. Why? If we might die today, I'd like to know more about the man I'm dying with. Something almost like a smile touched his lips. We will not die today. But he spoke anyway, his deep voice painting pictures of mountains and deserts, of coming-of-age ceremonies and his father's position as a respected warrior. Clara listened, momentarily forgetting the danger as his words transported her. The sun was setting when Nakohi suddenly stiffened, head tilted like a wolf scenting prey. They come, he said softly. Go inside. Now. Clara obeyed, heart pounding. Through the window, she watched him stand, weapon at his side but not raised, facing the approaching riders with the stillness of a man prepared for whatever came. She realized with a start that she was praying, not just for herself, but for him, for the complicated, educated warrior who had purchased her freedom rather than her body, who might now die protecting her. The thought was strangely unbearable. The confrontation with the raiders had ended without bloodshed, though the tension had hung in the air like lightning before a storm. Nakohi had spoken to them in rapid Apache, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. Clara had watched from the window, clutching the small pistol as the 5 men, 3 Apache and 2 rough-looking whites, conferred among themselves. Something Nakohi said made the apparent leader laugh, a harsh sound that carried across the yard. They had ridden away eventually, but not before one of them had fired an arrow into the ground at Nakohi's feet, a promise that they would return. In the week that followed, Nakohi had been more vigilant than ever, patrolling the boundaries of his property daily. He spoke little of the encounter, but Clara noticed he slept even less than before, if he slept at all. Then the weather had turned again, bringing freezing rain that soaked through clothing in seconds. Clara had been caught in it while gathering firewood, the icy deluge striking so suddenly she'd had no time to seek shelter. By evening, a telltale tickle had settled in her throat. By midnight, she was burning with fever. Nakohi discovered her condition when he returned from his dawn patrol. Clara had tried to rise and prepare coffee as usual, only to collapse back onto her bed, her limbs leaden and uncooperative. You are ill, he said, pressing a cool hand to her forehead. His touch was surprisingly gentle for hands so capable of violence. Just a chill, she rasped, trying to sit up again. I'll be fine. Nakohi shook his head. Fever is not just anything in winter. Without further discussion, he set about building up the fire and filling a kettle with water. Clara drifted in and out of awareness as the day progressed. She was vaguely conscious of Nakohi leaving and returning, of bitter-tasting teas being pressed to her lips, of cool cloths on her forehead. At some point, he helped her into a dry nightgown, his movements clinical and respectful, his eyes averted from her exposed skin. The fever climbed steadily despite his efforts. By nightfall, Clara was delirious, the cabin walls seeming to breathe and pulse around her. In her fever dreams, she was back at the trading post, being sold again and again to faceless men. She cried out for her mother, long dead, and for her father, though she knew he would not come. "Please," she begged the shadows, "don't let them take me. No one will take you." Nakohi's voice cut through the delirium. "You are safe here. Father sold me," she mumbled. "Like furniture, like a horse. That is done." His voice was firm. "You are not property. Yours," she countered, the fever loosening her tongue. "The paper says." "Paper means nothing." He bathed her face with cool water. "A man's word is what matters. And I give you mine. You are free to go when you are well." Clara tried to focus on his face, but it kept blurring into the shadows. Where would I go? The question that had kept her at the cabin all these months. "Wherever you choose." He lifted her head gently, helping her drink a bitter herbal tea. "But first, you must fight this fever." As the night deepened, Clara's fever worsened. She thrashed against the bedclothes, alternately burning and freezing. Nakohi gathered every blanket in the cabin, wrapping her tightly. When that wasn't enough, he added his own body heat, sitting beside her on the bed, holding her shoulders as she shivered violently. In her delirium, Clara spoke of things she'd never voiced aloud. Her fears, her loneliness, the crushing weight of having no place in the world, and deeper fears, that she would die here, unmourned and forgotten, that her life had amounted to nothing but a transaction between men. "You will not die," Nakohi said fiercely, as if commanding it to be so. When she continued to shake with cold despite the blankets, he stretched out beside her, careful to stay atop the covers, lending her his warmth. Through the worst of the night, he sang softly in Apache, healing songs his grandmother had taught him. He explained when Clara asked in a moment of lucidity. The deep, rhythmic chanting anchored her, giving her something to follow back from the brink of consciousness when the fever threatened to drag her under. Dawn found them both exhausted. Clara's fever had broken sometime in the darkest hours, leaving her weak but clear-headed. She awoke to find Nakohi slumped against the headboard, asleep sitting up, one hand still resting protectively on her arm. In sleep, the hard lines of his face softened. She studied him openly for the first time. The high cheekbones, the small scar near his left eye, the surprising length of his eyelashes. Not handsome by conventional standards, but striking, powerful. "Nakohi," she whispered, testing his name on her tongue. He woke instantly, dark eyes focusing on her face. Seeing her improved condition, relief washed over his features before the customary reserve returned. "The fever has broken," he said, moving away from the bed. "You will recover now." "Thank you," Clara said, meaning it more deeply than she'd ever meant those words before. "For caring for me." He nodded once, accepting her gratitude without comment, and turned to prepare a simple broth for her weakened stomach. But something fundamental had shifted between them. Clara had seen behind his stoic mask, and Nakohi had heard her deepest fears. Neither could pretend the night hadn't happened. Neither was quite ready to acknowledge what it meant. Clara's recovery was slow but steady. For nearly a week after the fever broke, she remained weak, able to sit up for only short periods before exhaustion claimed her. Nakohi proved an attentive caretaker, preparing broths and teas with medicinal herbs, keeping the fire well stoked, and ensuring she drank enough water. His gentleness surprised her. Those hands that could string a bow, skin a deer, or wield a war club moved with delicate precision when changing the bandage on her chafed wrist or helping her sit up to eat. He spoke little, but his actions revealed a compassion Clara hadn't expected. One evening, as she sat wrapped in blankets by the fire, Clara noticed Nakohi examining one of his books with unusual concentration. His brow furrowed. "What are you reading?" she asked. He hesitated before answering. "Trying to read. My English reading is better than writing." Clara considered this. I could help you. I was going to be a teacher before my father gambled away our future, before I became property. The unspoken words hung between them. You would teach me? Genuine interest flickered in his eyes. A trade, she suggested. I'll help with your writing if you teach me about plants and tracking. Things I should know living here. The phrase acknowledged what neither had directly stated, that she wasn't planning to leave, at least not immediately. Nakohi nodded slowly. A fair exchange. The next day, he presented her with a slate board he'd kept from his school days, along with chalk and a primer. Clara ran her fingers over the smooth surface, memories of her own education rising like ghosts. My mother taught me to read, she said softly. She had been a teacher before marrying my father. She taught you well. Nakohi sat across from her at the table. Your speech is educated. Clara smiled at the compliment. Let's see what you already know. His penmanship was surprisingly good, though formal and stiff, the result of strict mission school training. His grammar was nearly perfect in simple sentences, but he struggled with complex constructions and the inconsistent spelling of English. You read Homer but have trouble with basic correspondence? She asked, puzzled. Reading comes easier. The white teachers. He paused. They were more concerned with beating the Apache language out of us than ensuring we mastered written English. The matter-of-fact way he referenced the abuse made Clara's heart ache. Well, I won't be beating anyone, she said firmly. That's not how teaching works. Something like amusement flickered across his face. I am relieved to hear it. Their lessons began that evening and continued nightly by the fire. Clara discovered Nakohi was an eager student, quick to grasp concepts and rarely needing instruction repeated. His only limitation was impatience, the warrior spirit chafing at the tedious practice required for mastery. The same word is spelled differently here and here, he pointed out one evening, frustration evident. English makes no sense. True, Clara admitted. It borrows from too many languages. But that's why we practice. In exchange, Nakohi began Clara's education in wilderness survival. Despite her lingering weakness, he took her on short walks around the property, teaching her to identify edible plants, medicinal herbs, and signs of animals. He showed her how to tell direction without a compass, how to predict weather from cloud patterns, how to move quietly through the forest. Why do you step like that? He asked one day, watching her pick her way awkwardly over fallen logs. Like what? Heavy, unbalanced. He demonstrated the difference, his own movements fluid and silent. You fight the ground instead of working with it. Clara tried to mimic his walking style, feeling foolish until she began to understand the difference in weight distribution. I never thought about how I walk before. Most whites don't. There was no judgment in his observation. You're taught to conquer the land, not to live as part of it. As December approached, bringing shorter days and colder nights, their evening lessons extended. One night, as Clara corrected his written translation of an Apache folktale, she glanced up to find him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. What? She asked. You smile when you teach, he said simply. You did not smile before. Clara hadn't realized this herself. I suppose I didn't have much reason to smile before. And now? The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to address. Now I have purpose, she said carefully. Teaching gives me that. He accepted this answer with a nod, but something in his eyes suggested he'd heard what she hadn't said. That her purpose had become intertwined with his presence, his cabin, his life. Later that evening, as they read together by the fire, their hands brushed as they both reached for the same book. A simple, accidental touch, but neither pulled away immediately. For a brief moment, they remained connected, the warmth of skin on skin sending a current of awareness through Clara that had nothing to do with fever or illness. When she finally met his eyes, The carefully maintained distance between them seemed to have narrowed to nothing. In that moment, Clara realized with startling clarity that she no longer thought of Nakohi as her owner, her captor, or even her reluctant protector. She thought of him simply as a man whose touch made her skin tingle with something she wasn't yet ready to name. Winter had set in fully by mid-December, bringing heavy snows that isolated the cabin for days at a time. Their supplies, while carefully rationed, were beginning to run low. Coffee, flour, salt, ammunition, necessities that could not be hunted or gathered from the frozen landscape. "We must go to town," Nakohi announced one morning, studying their dwindling stores. "Tomorrow, if the weather holds." Clara looked up from her mending, her stomach instantly knotting with anxiety. She hadn't left the cabin property in nearly 3 months. The thought of facing the townspeople, their judgment, their whispers, made her palms sweat. "Both of us?" she asked, hoping he might go alone. Nakohi nodded. "The trail is dangerous in winter. Better not to travel alone." That night, Clara slept fitfully, troubled by dreams of pointing fingers and mocking laughter. By morning, her resolve had hardened. She would not cower or show shame. Whatever people thought of her situation, she had survived. There was dignity in that. They set out at dawn, Nakohi on his horse with Clara riding behind him, her arms circling his waist for balance. The closeness was necessary but unsettling. She could feel the heat of his body through their layers of winter clothing, the steady rhythm of his breathing. The journey took twice as long as usual, the horse picking its way carefully through snow-covered trails. By the time they reached Copper Springs, the sun was high overhead, glinting off snow-laden buildings. Clara felt eyes upon them immediately. A woman outside the mercantile crossed to the other side of the street. 2 miners paused their conversation to stare openly. "Hold your head up," Nakohi said quietly as he helped her dismount. "You have done nothing wrong." His words steadied her. They entered the trading post together, Clara walking beside rather than behind him. A small statement that was not lost on Tom Bailey behind the counter. "Miss Whitfield," Bailey greeted her, surprise evident in his voice. "Good to see you're well, Mr. Bailey." She nodded coolly, determined to show no weakness. Bailey turned to Nakohi. "What can I get you folks today?" As Nakohi listed their needed supplies, Clara wandered the small store, acutely aware of being watched. Mrs. Donovan entered, stopping short at the sight of Clara. "Clara Whitfield, as I live and breathe." The older woman hurried over, concern etched in her features. "Child, are you all right? We've been so worried." The genuine warmth in her voice nearly undid Clara's composure. "I'm fine, Mrs. Donovan. Truly." The woman's eyes darted to Nakohi at the counter, then back to Clara. She lowered her voice. "Has he mistreated you?" "No," Clara said firmly. "He's been honorable." Mrs. Donovan looked skeptical but squeezed Clara's hand. "If you ever need help, thank you, but I'm managing well enough." Clara smiled to soften her words. "How is Reverend Pierce? And the church ladies?" They chatted briefly about town happenings while Nakohi continued his business. Clara was painfully aware of the whispers and stares from others who entered the store, the word spreading rapidly that the squaw man's white woman had returned to town. She was examining a shelf of fabric when a familiar, slurred voice called her name. "Clara girl, sweet Jesus, it is you." Her father stood swaying in the doorway, thinner and more haggard than she remembered, his clothes filthy and his eyes bloodshot. Clara froze, a wave of complicated emotions washing over her. Anger, pity, grief. Thomas Whitfield stumbled toward her, arms outstretched as if for an embrace. "Been worried sick about you, girl. Thought that Savage might have." "Don't." Clara stepped back, voice tight. "Don't pretend you were concerned." Her father's face crumpled. "Now, Clara, you know I had no choice. Stevens would have killed me." There's always a choice. The words came out steadier than she felt. You chose to gamble. You chose to drink. You chose to sell your daughter rather than face your debts like a man. The trading post had gone silent, every ear straining to hear the confrontation. I'm your father, he protested weakly. No. Clara straightened her spine. You forfeited that right when you signed that paper. From the corner of her eye, she saw Nakohi watching silently, ready to intervene but allowing her to fight her own battle. Her father's expression hardened. So that's how it is? Turned against your own blood for an engine? Become his willing squaw. The slur stung, but Clara refused to show it. He has shown me more respect as his property than you ever did as your daughter. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Thomas Whitfield's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. You little. That's enough. Nakohi's quiet voice cut through the tension as he moved to Clara's side. He did not touch her but stood close enough that his presence was a shield. Thomas Whitfield deflated instantly, backing away from the tall Apache's impassive stare. As they finished their business and prepared to leave, Nakohi surprised Clara by purchasing a length of blue calico fabric, paying for it with carefully counted coins. What's that for? She asked as they stepped outside. For you. He handed her the package awkwardly. Winter is long. Thought you might like something new. The unexpected gift touched her deeply. It wasn't merely the fabric itself, but the thought behind it. His recognition of her as a woman who might still take pleasure in pretty things, despite their circumstances. As they rode home through the gathering dusk, Clara held the package close, her father's cruel words fading against the memory of Nakohi standing beside her, a silent pillar of support. Perhaps for the first time since being sold, she felt not like property, but like someone worth protecting. The confrontation in town had changed something fundamental between Clara and Nakohi. Her public defense of him, her choice to stand beside rather than distance herself from him, had shifted their dynamic. They returned to the cabin with a new understanding. Not quite partnership, not quite friendship, but something evolving toward both. Winter deepened, bringing snowdrifts that reached the windowsills and nights cold enough to freeze water in the bucket by the door. Their world contracted to the cabin's single room, where survival depended on careful preparation and mutual cooperation. Clara found purpose in transforming their shelter into something more homelike. With the blue calico, she made curtains for the window and a cover for the rough wooden table. She stuffed a pillow with dried grasses and covered it with scraps of fabric. Small touches that softened the cabin's utilitarian edges. She caught Nakohi studying these changes, his expression unreadable. Does it bother you? She asked. My changing things? He considered before answering, something he always did, weighing words carefully before spending them. No, it is good. That night, he presented her with a hand-carved wooden comb, the teeth smooth and perfectly spaced, the handle polished to a soft sheen. For your hair, he said simply when she gasped in surprise. Clara ran her fingers over the fine craftsmanship. It's beautiful. When did you make this? Evenings. He nodded toward his usual spot by the door. While you sleep. The thought of him working through the night, carving this gift while watching over her, brought a warmth to her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. Thank you, she said softly. That evening they established a new ritual. After the day's work was done and supper cleared away, they sat together at the table rather than in their separate corners. Nakohi continued his writing lessons while Clara used the precious comb on her hair, working through the long strands methodically. She caught him watching her once, his eyes following the movement of the comb through her hair. When their eyes met, he didn't look away immediately as he once would have. Apache women brush their hair 100 strokes each night, he said. For strength. Clara smiled. My mother said the same, except she claimed it was for beauty. Perhaps it is both. Something in his voice made her cheeks warm. As December's grip tightened, they fell in to comfortable routines. Nakohi taught Clara to make pemmican, preserved meat mixed with berries and fat, that would sustain them if game became scarce. She showed him how her mother had preserved vegetables in salt and vinegar. Together, they smoked fish from the stream before it froze completely. Clara learned to anticipate his needs before he voiced them, handing him tools as he repaired harnesses or patched the roof. Nakohi began timing his hunts to return before dark, knowing she worried when he was late. Neither acknowledged these adjustments, but both recognized the care behind them. One evening, as heavy snow confined them indoors, Clara decided to attempt an Apache dish Nakohi had described from his childhood. A stew of dried meat, wild onions, and the last of their stored squash. She worked quietly while he mended a torn winter moccasin, occasionally asking questions about seasonings or cooking time. When she placed the steaming bowl before him, uncertainty flickered across her face. "I'm not sure if it's right." Nakohi took a careful spoonful, his expression shifting from surprise to something that might have been pleasure. "It is very close. My grandmother's was spicier. I can add more pepper next time," Clara said, then paused, realizing she'd assumed there would be a next time, that their shared meals would continue indefinitely. "Next time," he agreed, continuing to eat with evident appreciation. They ate in companionable silence until Nakohi spoke again. "Why did you defend me in town?" The question caught Clara off guard. "What do you mean?" "You could have agreed with your father. Said I mistreated you. They would have helped you leave." His dark eyes studied her. "Why didn't you?" Clara considered her answer carefully. "Because it would have been a lie. And because—" She hesitated. "Because you've treated me with more dignity as your property than most free women receive from their husbands." He flinched slightly at the word property, but nodded slowly. "My father would say I have Stockholm Syndrome," she added with a small, bitter smile. "Becoming attached to my captor." "You are not captive." His voice was firm. "The door stands open." "I know." Clara met his gaze steadily. "That's why I stay." The admission hung between them, neither willing to examine its full implications. But that night, for the first time, Nakohi moved his sleeping pallet closer to the fire, and by extension closer to Clara's bed, than his customary position by the door. As Clara drifted toward sleep, she realized she no longer feared his proximity. Quite the opposite. His presence brought comfort, security, and something else she wasn't yet ready to name. Outside, the winter wind howled against the cabin walls, but inside, something warm and tentative was beginning to bloom. As December progressed, Clara found herself thinking more frequently of Christmas. In her childhood, it had been a time of modest celebration. New ribbons for her hair, special foods, carols around her mother's piano. Even after her mother's death and their move west, she and her father had maintained some small observances of the holiday. But here, in this cabin caught between two worlds, she had no idea whether the day would be marked at all. Nakohi had been raised partly in Christian mission schools, but she had no sense of whether he attached any significance to the holiday. A week before Christmas, Clara began to feel a deepening melancholy. She tried to hide it, going about her daily tasks with forced cheerfulness, but Nakohi was too observant to miss the change. "You are sad," he said one evening as they sat by the fire. Not a question, but a quiet observation. Clara looked up from her mending. "Just remembering. Your father. Christmas," she clarified. "My mother loved the holiday. We had traditions." Nakohi nodded, his expression thoughtful. "The Jesus birth celebration." "Yes." Clara smiled faintly. "Did you observe it? At the school? Services? Hymns? Small gifts sometimes?" His tone revealed little about whether those memories were pleasant or painful. "What traditions did your family have?" The question surprised her. Nakohi rarely asked personal questions. "We decorated a small tree with paper ornaments I made." Mother read the nativity story from her Bible. We sang carols. The memories brought both comfort and fresh pain. It's silly to miss such small things. Not silly, he said firmly. Traditions connect us to what we have lost. His understanding eased something in her chest. They spoke no more of it that night, but Clara noticed Nakohi watching her closely in the days that followed, as if trying to solve a puzzle. On December 24th, Clara awoke to find the cabin empty. Nakohi's absence wasn't unusual. He often left at dawn to hunt or check his trap lines, but a note on the table was unprecedented. Gone to forest. Back by midday. Clara traced his carefully formed letters, evidence of their nightly writing lessons. The fact that he'd left a note rather than simply disappearing as usual seemed significant, though she couldn't say why. As morning stretched toward noon with no sign of him, Clara found herself watching the window with increasing frequency. The heavy snow had stopped, but the temperature had dropped further, making any extended time outdoors dangerous. By early afternoon, worry had begun to gnaw at her. What if he'd been injured? Caught in a deadfall? Encountered hostile raiders? The possibilities multiplied in her mind, each more dire than the last. She was contemplating whether to attempt to follow his tracks when the door finally opened. Nakohi entered in a blast of cold air, dragging behind him a small pine tree, its branches heavy with snow. "You're safe," Clara exclaimed, relief making her voice higher than normal. "I was worried." Nakohi stomped snow from his boots. The perfect tree was far. He propped the small pine against the wall, its scent filling the cabin immediately. "This is right? For Christmas." Clara stared at him, then at the tree, understanding dawning slowly. "You brought this for me?" He nodded, something almost like uncertainty flickering across his normally impassive features. "For your tradition." Emotion swelled in Clara's throat, nearly choking her. This man, who owed her nothing, who had already given her shelter and protection, had spent hours in dangerous cold to bring her this small piece of her past. "It's perfect," she managed, blinking back tears. "Thank you." Together, they secured the tree in a bucket of sand near the hearth. Clara showed Nakohi how to make simple ornaments from scraps of paper and bits of colored thread. He watched her demonstrations carefully, then created his own, precise geometric patterns that reminded Clara of Apache designs she'd seen on blankets. As twilight deepened outside, the small tree glowed in the firelight, adorned with their handiwork. Clara had also fashioned a star from thin pieces of wood Nakohi had whittled for her, binding them together with sinew and dusting them with a bit of precious flour to suggest snow. "In my mother's Bible, the wise men followed a star to find the Christ child," she explained as Nakohi helped her place it atop the tree. "My people also use stars for guidance," he said. "Different stories, same sky." That evening, they shared a special meal, rabbit stew enriched with dried berries and the last precious pinch of cinnamon Clara had brought from her father's cabin. Afterward, Nakohi surprised her by producing a small package wrapped in a piece of soft deerskin. "For Christmas," he said, placing it in her hands. Inside, Clara found a delicately carved wooden star pendant on a leather cord. The craftsmanship was exquisite, each point perfectly symmetrical, the surface polished to a warm glow. "It's beautiful," she whispered, running her finger over the intricate design. "Stars guide us home," Nakohi said quietly. "Even when home changes." Clara had no gift prepared, having assumed the day would pass unmarked. But inspiration struck suddenly. "Would you like to hear the Christmas story? From the Bible?" Nakohi nodded, settling by the fire as Clara retrieved the Bible he kept hidden beneath the floorboards. Her voice filled the cabin as she read the familiar words. "And it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus." As she read, Clara was acutely aware of Nakohi's attentive presence, his interest in her tradition. In this moment, The cabin felt not like a place she had been brought against her will, but like a home they were creating together. When she finished reading, their eyes met across the soft glow of the fire. Something shifted in the air between them, a recognition, an acknowledgement of the bond that had formed so gradually neither had noticed its strength until now. Nakohi leaned forward slightly, his expression softening in a way Clara had never seen before. For a breathless moment, she thought he might. A sudden sound outside, a branch breaking under the weight of snow, shattered the moment. Nakohi was instantly alert, moving to the window, hand on his knife. The spell broken, Clara touched the wooden star at her throat, wondering what might have happened if winter had kept its silence for just a few moments longer. January brought brief respite from the heavy snows, allowing Nakohi to check the small herd of cattle he kept in a sheltered valley a mile from the cabin. The 6 animals were his investment in the future, potential trade, meat for lean times, and calves to expand the herd come spring. "I should reinforce the fence while the weather holds," he told Clara over breakfast. "Wolves have been circling closer." Wolves or two-legged predators? Clara had learned that cattle rustling was common in the territory, especially in winter when food grew scarce. Nakohi's mouth quirked in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "You are learning to think like Apache." He left after breakfast, rifle slung across his back, promising to return before dusk. Clara spent the day engaged in her usual tasks, cleaning, mending, preparing dinner with the modest ingredients they had. The wooden star pendant Nakohi had given her for Christmas hung around her neck, a comforting weight against her skin. When afternoon shadows began to lengthen with no sign of his return, Clara felt the first stirrings of unease. Nakohi was meticulously reliable, especially since they had established their more comfortable routines. If he said before dusk, he meant before dusk. The first flakes of new snow began to fall as the light faded. Clara paced the cabin, checking the window repeatedly, though it revealed only swirling white against darkening sky. She had just decided to light the lantern to hang as a beacon when she heard it. A dull thud against the door, followed by the scrape of something heavy sliding down the wood. Heart racing, she grabbed the small pistol Nakohi had taught her to use and approached cautiously. "Who's there?" Her voice sounded thin in her own ears. No answer came. Taking a deep breath, Clara eased the door open, pistol raised. Nakohi lay crumpled on the threshold, blood darkening the snow beneath him. "Nakohi!" She dropped the gun, falling to her knees beside him. He was conscious but barely, his breathing ragged, his face gray with pain and cold. "What happened? Who did this?" "Rustlers," he managed through gritted teeth. "3 men. Shot me when I surprised them." With desperate strength, Clara helped him inside, half dragging him toward the fire. Blood soaked his left side, the wound partially frozen from his journey through the snow. How he had managed to reach the cabin at all seemed miraculous. "I need to see the wound," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady as she helped him remove his buckskin shirt. The bullet had entered his side, just below the ribs. No exit wound, which meant the lead was still inside him. Clara's hands trembled as she assessed the damage. She had no medical training beyond basic first aid her mother had taught her, but she knew the bullet had to come out. "Tell me what to do," she pleaded, pressing a clean cloth against the bleeding wound. Through waves of pain, Nakohi gave terse instructions. "Boil water. Sterilize his knife in the flames. Find the whiskey he kept for medicinal purposes. Prepare bandages from clean linen." Clara worked frantically, terror clutching at her throat. The idea of digging a bullet from human flesh made her lightheaded, but the alternative, watching Nakohi bleed to death or succumb to infection, was unthinkable. "I can't do this," she whispered as she knelt beside him with the sterilized knife. "I'll kill you. You can." His dark eyes fixed on hers, strength in them despite his pain. "You must." With shaking hands, Clara gave him a leather strap to bite down on, then took a fortifying swallow of whiskey herself. The cabin filled with the metallic smell of blood as she cut into the wound, following Nakohi's strangled directions. His body went rigid with agony, but he didn't cry out. Only the white-knuckled grip on the bed frame betrayed his suffering. It felt like hours but was likely only minutes before the knife point encountered something solid. The bullet. With a sick feeling, Clara worked the blade until the small lead ball rolled free. Nakohi's body went limp, consciousness finally fleeing from the pain. Clara's medical knowledge ended with removing the bullet, but instinct took over. She cleaned the wound thoroughly with boiled water and whiskey, packed it with herbs Nakohi had shown her were for healing, and bound it tightly with strips of her cleanest petticoat. Then she waited, bathing his face with cool water as fever took hold. Through the night, she changed the bandages as they soaked through, spooned water between his cracked lips, and whispered desperate prayers that mixed her mother's Christianity with Apache words she'd learned from Nakohi. "Please," she begged whatever spirits might be listening. "Please don't take him." The realization that she couldn't bear to lose him came with the force of physical pain. This man who had purchased her like livestock had somehow become essential to her existence. She couldn't imagine the cabin, the mountains, her life without his steady presence. As dawn approached, Nakohi's fever spiked dangerously. He thrashed against the bedclothes, speaking in rapid Apache that Clara couldn't understand. She caught only fragments, names perhaps, or places from his past. Once he reached out, clutching her hand with surprising strength. "Stay," he said clearly, before slipping back into delirium. "I'm here," Clara promised, pressing her lips to his burning forehead. "I'm not going anywhere." She didn't know if he heard her, but his breathing seemed to ease slightly at the sound of her voice. Outside, snow continued to fall, isolating them completely from any possible help. Clara understood with terrifying clarity that Nakohi's life rested entirely in her inexperienced hands, and that if he died, something vital within her would perish with him. For 3 days, Nakohi hovered between life and death. Clara barely slept, dozing in short bursts beside his bed, alert to every change in his breathing. She changed bandages, brewed medicinal teas from his stores of herbs, and spooned broth between his lips when he was lucid enough to swallow. On the 4th morning, Clara woke from a fitful sleep to find Nakohi watching her, his eyes clear for the first time since the shooting. "You're awake," she said, relief washing through her as she pressed a hand to his forehead. The fever had broken. "How long?" His voice was rough from disuse. "4 days." Clara helped him sip water. "You've been very ill." Nakohi glanced down at his bandaged side, then back to Clara's exhausted face. Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You saved my life." "You saved mine first," she replied simply. "Many times over." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Then we are even." "Not quite. You'll need to stay in bed at least another week." Clara adopted a stern tone that brooked no argument. "The wound was deep, and you lost a great deal of blood." To her surprise, Nakohi didn't protest. Perhaps he recognized the steel beneath her gentle insistence, or perhaps he was simply too weak to argue. As days passed, his strength gradually returned. Clara found herself in the unfamiliar role of caretaker rather than captive, a reversal that shifted their dynamic yet again. She helped him sit up, change clothes, and eventually move to a chair by the fire for short periods. During his convalescence, the invisible walls between them seemed to thin. Perhaps it was the intimacy of caregiving, or perhaps near death had stripped away pretenses, but they began to speak more freely than before. One evening, as snowflakes drifted past the window, Nakohi asked a question that had clearly been weighing on him. "Why did you really stay? After the fever, when I said you could go?" Clara considered her answer carefully. "At first, because I had nowhere else to go. Then, because it was safer here than anywhere else I could imagine. And now," his dark eyes studied her face, Now I stay because I want to. The admission cost her something, but the time for half-truths had passed. Nakohi nodded slowly, accepting her answer. Then, to Clara's surprise, he reached beneath his pillow and withdrew a small object wrapped in soft leather. "I want you to see this," he said, unwrapping what appeared to be a fragment of painted hide mounted on a wooden backing. "My father's war shield, the only piece that survived." Clara took it carefully, studying the faded designs, geometric patterns in red, black, and white surrounding a central figure that might have been an eagle or hawk. "It protected him through many battles," Nakohi continued, "until the last one." "What happened to him?" Clara asked softly. Nakohi's expression darkened with remembered pain. "When I was sent to the white school, my family continued to resist reservation life. They joined Chief Victorio's band, fighting to retain traditional lands." He paused. "My father died at Tres Castillos with many others. My mother and sisters, I never learned their fate." Clara's heart ached for the boy he had been, torn from his family, then left with no home to return to. "I'm so sorry. I searched for 2 years when I returned from school." His voice remained steady, but Clara saw the cost of these memories in the tension of his jaw. "Found only stories of death and disease. Eventually, I stopped looking." "Is that when you came here?" He nodded. "This land belongs to neither world. Like me." Clara thought of her own losses, her mother's slow death from consumption, her father's descent into gambling and drink. "My mother taught piano to wealthy children in Boston," she said, offering her own truth in exchange for his. "When she married my father, her family disowned her. He was charming but irresponsible, always chasing the next opportunity." She described her mother's determination to give Clara an education despite their circumstances, the books they read together, the dreams of Clara becoming a teacher someday. "After she died, Father started drinking heavily. Each place we lived, things got worse. By the time we reached Copper Springs, he was gambling away everything we had." She twisted her hands in her lap. "I think he was relieved to be rid of me. One less responsibility." "His loss," Nakohi said quietly. "His great loss." The simple statement, delivered without pity or judgment, loosened something in Clara's chest that had been tight since the day her father signed that terrible paper. They sat in silence for a time, the weight of shared histories settling between them. When Clara finally rose to tend the fire, Nakohi caught her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "Thank you," he said, "for staying, for saving my life." Clara looked down at their joined hands, his copper dark against her pale skin, both equally capable of creation and destruction, of causing pain or offering comfort. "Thank you," she replied, "for giving me a life worth living." His fingers tightened briefly around hers, the touch saying what words could not yet express. When she finally pulled away to prepare their evening meal, something had fundamentally changed between them. They were no longer captor and captive, owner and property, or even reluctant companions thrown together by circumstance. They were two wounded souls who had somehow, against all odds, begun to heal each other. And in that healing, something new and fragile had taken root. Something neither was quite ready to name, but both could feel growing stronger with each passing day. February passed in a blur of snowstorms and quiet evenings. Nakohi's wound healed slowly but steadily under Clara's attentive care. By March, he had regained enough strength to resume light work around the cabin, though Clara watched him like a hawk for any signs of overexertion. Their relationship continued to evolve in subtle ways. They now ate their meals together at the table Clara had covered with blue calico. Their evening reading sessions often dissolved into conversations that stretched late into the night. Sometimes their hands would brush as they passed objects between them, and neither pulled away as quickly as before. One morning in early April, Clara woke to the sound of birdsong, the first she'd heard since autumn. She went to the window and found the world transformed. Snow remained in patches, but the stream behind the cabin flowed freely again, and tiny green buds dotted the bare branches of the aspens. Spring comes suddenly in the mountains, Nakohi said, joining her at the window. One day winter, the next day life returns. The arrival of spring brought practical concerns. The path to town would soon be passable, making travel possible again. Clara found herself wondering what this meant for their arrangement. Would Nakohi expect her to leave now that she could? Did she want to? These questions remained unspoken as they fell into the rhythms of the season. Nakohi repaired winter damage to the cabin's exterior. Clara prepared ground for a small garden, using seeds she'd carefully saved from autumn vegetables. They worked side by side most days, their bodies moving in unconscious coordination, anticipating each other's needs without words. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson, Nakohi broke their comfortable silence. "The old medicine man will visit tomorrow." Clara turned to him in surprise. "Yellow Hawk? Why?" "To see that I have recovered. And—" he hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "To meet you." "Me?" Clara's pulse quickened. Why would he want to meet me? Nakohi seemed to be choosing his words with unusual care. "He is the closest I have to family. He should know the woman who lives in my home." Something in his phrasing made Clara's cheeks warm. Woman of his home, not his property or servant. The distinction felt significant. "I'll prepare something special for the meal," she said, trying to mask her nervousness. Yellow Hawk was the only Apache who still maintained contact with Nakohi. His opinion clearly mattered. The medicine man arrived at midday, a wizened figure whose weathered face betrayed little emotion as Clara welcomed him. He spoke with Nakohi in Apache for some time, occasionally glancing at Clara with sharp, evaluating eyes. She busied herself preparing the meal, venison stew with dried berries and the first spring greens, trying not to appear as anxious as she felt. As they ate, Yellow Hawk surprised her by speaking in perfect English. "You removed the bullet from his side?" "Yes," Clara replied. "I had no choice." The old man nodded. "Good hands. Strong spirit." He turned to Nakohi. "She is not what I expected when I heard a white woman lived here." "She is unique," Nakohi agreed, his eyes meeting Clara's briefly. After the meal, Yellow Hawk asked to speak with Nakohi privately. They walked toward the stream, deep in conversation. Clara watched from the doorway, wondering what they discussed with such gravity. When they returned, Yellow Hawk approached Clara directly. "You have brought light back to this place," he said cryptically. "The darkness has receded." Before she could respond, he pressed something into her hand. A small pouch of soft leather decorated with intricate beadwork in blue and white. "Marriage beads," he explained. "Should you choose to accept them." Clara's breath caught. She looked to Nakohi, who stood utterly still, his expression guarded but vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. After Yellow Hawk departed, they sat in weighted silence until Nakohi finally spoke. "The beads are a traditional courtship gift," he explained. "Yellow Hawk brought them because I told him I wished to ask you to stay, not as what you were before, but as my wife." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. "Your wife, if you wish it." His voice was steady, but she saw tension in the set of his shoulders. "When the trail's clear completely, you could leave. Go anywhere. I would give you money, supplies, or—" he took a breath. "You could stay. As my chosen partner, not my purchased property." An Apache wife? Clara's mind raced with implications. Would your people accept that? Most would not, he admitted. Yellow Hawk is unusual, but I do not seek their approval. And the settlers? They barely tolerate us now. Their opinions matter nothing to me. His dark eyes held hers. Only yours matters. Clara turned the beaded pouch over in her hands, its weight far greater than its physical presence. "I need to know something first," she said quietly. "That day at the trading post, why did you really pay my father's debt?" Nakohi was silent for a long moment. "I told myself it was to protect you from worse men," he finally said. "But perhaps I had been alone too long." The simple honesty of his answer moved her deeply. "I've thought about leaving," she confessed. "About what I would do if I walked away from here." His expression remained unchanged, but she saw his hands tighten slightly on his knees. "And I realized," she continued, "that anywhere I went, I would be looking back, wondering if you were well, if you were safe." She met his gaze directly. "I don't want to look back anymore." "What do you want, Clara?" he asked, her name sounding like a prayer on his lips. She reached across the space between them and placed her hand over his. "I want to stay, not because I was brought here, not because I have nowhere else to go, but because I choose you, Nakohi, as you have chosen me." When their lips finally met, it felt not like a first kiss but like a homecoming, the natural conclusion to a journey that had begun in the most unlikely of circumstances. Outside, spring continued its inexorable transformation of the world. Inside, between two people once separated by every boundary imaginable, winter's last walls had finally thawed. The transformation of their relationship brought a new harmony to the cabin. Clara wore the beaded marriage pouch on a cord around her neck alongside the carved star. Nakohi moved his sleeping pallet beside her bed, though they maintained a chaste distance, both silently agreeing to wait for a proper ceremony before taking the final step toward physical union. As April blossomed into May, they worked side by side preparing the land for planting. Clara's small garden expanded, while Nakohi repaired fences and checked on his slowly growing herd of cattle. They spoke of the future now, plans for expanding the cabin, breeding the cattle, perhaps eventually building a proper barn. The outside world seemed distant until one sunny morning when the sound of approaching horses shattered their hard-won peace. Clara was hanging laundry when she spotted 3 riders cresting the hill. She recognized the lead rider immediately, Harold Simmons, son of the territorial land agent and notorious for his father's questionable dealings with settler claims. "Nakohi," she called, her voice steady despite the sudden knot in her stomach. He emerged from the shed, instantly alert to the potential threat. "Stay behind me," he said quietly, moving to stand on the porch, rifle casually but visibly propped against the wall within reach. The riders approached, Simmons flanked by 2 rough-looking men Clara didn't recognize. Their expressions betrayed contempt poorly disguised as official business. "That's far enough," Nakohi called when they were 20 yards from the cabin. Simmons reined in his horse, a false smile plastered across his florid face. "No need for hostility, just here on official business." He pulled a document from his saddlebag. "Seems there's been some confusion about this parcel of land." "No confusion," Nakohi replied evenly. "This is my property, legally purchased and registered." Simmons chuckled, glancing at his companions. "Well, that's the issue, isn't it? Territory's got new regulations. Indians can't own land outside the reservation anymore. New territorial governor's orders." Clara felt a surge of anger. "That's absurd. He has legal title." Simmons' eyes flicked to her, his expression hardening. "Ma'am, this doesn't concern you. Best leave legal matters to men who understand them." "My wife speaks with my voice," Nakohi said, the quiet authority in his tone making Clara's heart swell despite the danger. "And she is correct. The law cannot be applied retroactively to existing deeds." Simmons' facade of friendliness dropped. "Listen here, Injun. My father says this land's been reassigned. Prime cattle country shouldn't be wasted on a half-breed squatter and his woman." His gaze slid to Clara with insulting appraisal. "Though I might be persuaded to let you take her with you when you go." Clara saw Nakohi's shoulders tense, his hand drifting closer to the rifle. She stepped forward, placing a restraining hand on his arm. "Mr. Simmons," she said clearly, "my husband attended Carlisle Indian School. He can read and write better than most men in this territory, including, I suspect, yourself. He understands the law perfectly well." "The law's what we say it is out here," one of Simmons' companions growled. "Then perhaps you'd like to explain that to Governor Harding directly?" Nakohi reached slowly into his shirt and withdrew a folded document. "This deed bears his personal signature and seal, dated 1879, before your new regulations." Clara hadn't known about this document. Nakohi had kept it hidden, clearly anticipating this very situation. Simmons' expression wavered between disbelief and anger as Nakohi unfolded the paper. "Any attempt to seize legally deeded land would constitute criminal theft," Nakohi continued, his educated diction at odds with Simmons' expectations. "The governor takes a dim view of claim jumping, especially when motivated by racial prejudice rather than legal standing." "Let me see that," Simmons demanded, dismounting and approaching. "That's close enough," Nakohi warned, his voice unchanged but suddenly radiating danger. "I can read it to you from here." The standoff might have escalated further if not for the unexpected arrival of another rider, Reverend Pierce from town, his usually mild face set in uncharacteristic determination. "Thought I might find you here, Simmons?" the Reverend called. "Your father sent me to fetch you back. Says there's been a misunderstanding about the land registries." Simmons' face reddened. "What are you talking about, Reverend?" "My father." "Your father," Pierce interrupted firmly, "just received a telegram from Governor Harding's office. Something about unauthorized reassignment of legally deeded properties." The Reverend's eyes met Clara's briefly, a glimmer of support in them. Quite serious, apparently. The revelation visibly deflated Simmons. His companions shifted uncomfortably, suddenly less certain of their position. "This isn't over," Simmons muttered, remounting his horse. "No one wants Indian neighbors, especially ones with white women. You'll find life mighty uncomfortable." "We already have," Clara replied steadily. "And yet we thrive." After the claim jumpers departed, Reverend Pierce remained. "I overheard them plotting in town," he explained. "Couldn't stand by while they attempted such blatant theft." "Thank you, Reverend," Clara said warmly. The minister studied them both, his expression thoughtful. "Mrs. Donovan mentioned you two had formalized your arrangement." "We intend to," Nakohi confirmed, his hand finding Clara's. "In our own way." Pierce nodded slowly. "I'd be honored to perform a Christian ceremony as well, if you'd wish it. Before God, all people are equal, whatever others might say." The offer stunned Clara. Official recognition of their union by a minister would provide additional protection against those who might challenge their rights. "We would be honored," she replied, looking to Nakohi for confirmation. He squeezed her hand. "Two ceremonies, two traditions. Like us." As Reverend Pierce rode away with a promise to return the following Sunday, Clara turned to Nakohi. "You never told me about the governor's signature on the deed. Some advantages are best kept hidden until needed." A rare smile touched his lips. "The land agent who sold me this property wasn't expecting an Indian who could read the fine print and insist on proper documentation." Clara laughed, tension draining from her shoulders. Nakohi, walker between worlds indeed. His expression sobered as he gazed toward where the claim jumpers had disappeared. "They will try again. Different tactics, perhaps." "Then we'll be ready," Clara said with quiet certainty. "Together." His eyes met hers, filled with a fierce pride that matched her own. "Together," he agreed, the word a promise and a declaration all at once. 1 year to the day after Clara had stood trembling in the trading post while her father gambled away her future, she stood in the same building for a very different purpose. The dusty counter had been polished, the usually cluttered space cleared and decorated with wildflowers. Reverend Pierce stood before them in his Sunday best, Bible in hand, while a small gathering of witnesses looked on. Mrs. Donovan had helped Clara prepare, lending her a proper dress and fussing over her hair. "Never thought I'd see the day," she'd whispered, blinking back tears. "You two have shown this town something powerful. About courage." Nakohi wore a clean white shirt with his buckskin trousers, his long hair neatly braided with a single eagle feather, a compromise between worlds that suited him perfectly. His expression remained composed, but Clara saw the emotion in his eyes as she walked toward him. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. Reverend Pierce spoke of love's transformative power, of unions that transcended boundaries created by man rather than God. When Clara and Nakohi exchanged simple silver bands that Yellow Hawk had helped them trade for, their hands were steady, their voices clear. "What began in transaction has been transformed by choice," the Reverend concluded. "Let no man separate what God has joined together." Clara had expected whispers, perhaps even protests from the small crowd of townspeople who had gathered out of curiosity or genuine support. Instead, after a moment of silence, Mrs. Donovan began to clap, and others gradually joined in. Not raucous cheering, but a quiet acknowledgement that something remarkable had occurred. As they signed the marriage certificate, Clara noticed a familiar figure slumped in the corner. Her father, thinner and more haggard than ever, watching with bloodshot eyes. She had not invited him, had not spoken to him since their confrontation months earlier, but someone had apparently informed him of the ceremony. Nakohi followed her gaze. "You should speak with him," he said quietly. "For your peace, if not his." Clara nodded, gathering her courage. Thomas Whitfield shrank back as she approached, shame evident in his posture. "Clara girl," he mumbled. "You look just like your mother." "Hello, father." She kept her voice neutral, neither warm nor cold. "Never thought I'd see you married proper." He twisted his hat in his hands. "Especially to him." "Life takes unexpected turns," Clara replied. An awkward silence fell between them, years of hurt and betrayal too vast to bridge with simple conversation. "I'm sorry," her father said finally, the words seeming to cost him greatly. "For what I did. For selling you like property." "Yes," Clara said simply. "You should be." He flinched at her directness but nodded. "Don't expect forgiveness. Just wanted you to know. I recognize what I did." Clara studied the broken man before her. Once, she had feared becoming like her mother, gentle, refined, yet ultimately crushed by life's hardships. Now she feared becoming like her father, bitter, self-pitying, defeated. "Where are you living now?" she asked. "Nowhere particular. Odd jobs. Sleep at the livery when Miller lets me." Clara glanced back at Nakohi, who had been watching the exchange from a respectful distance. A silent understanding passed between them. "We need help with the spring planting," she said carefully, "and building a proper barn. If you can stay sober and work hard, there's a place for you. Not in our home, but in the old trapper's cabin down by the stream." Her father's head snapped up in disbelief. "You'd offer me that? After everything?" "Not offering forgiveness," Clara clarified. "Offering a chance to earn your own redemption. It's more than you gave me." When she returned to Nakohi's side, he nodded once in approval. "Compassion without weakness," he said softly. "The hardest balance to strike." After the ceremony, as most guests departed, Tom Bailey approached them hesitantly, a folded paper in his hand. "Thought you might want this," he said, handing it to Nakohi. "Found it in the old ledger while cleaning for the ceremony." It was the original bill of sale, the crude document that had transferred Clara from her father to Nakohi like a piece of merchandise. The sight of it brought back a rush of memories, both painful and transformative. "What should we do with it?" Clara asked. Nakohi considered for a moment, then led her outside where a small fire burned in a pit for the post-ceremony gathering. The past cannot be erased, he said, holding the paper above the flames. But its power over us can be broken. Together, they released the document into the fire, watching as the edges blackened and curled, the hateful words disappearing into ash. As they rode home, truly home now, the setting sun painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Their small cabin waited in the distance, smoke curling from the chimney, windows glowing with welcoming light. Clara's garden was sprouting new growth, and in the nearby pasture, a calf frolicked alongside its mother. "What are you thinking?" Nakohi asked as they paused to appreciate the view. Clara touched the wooden star at her throat, then the marriage beads that had been joined to it on the same cord, symbols of their intertwined paths. "I'm thinking about beginnings," she said. "How the worst day of my life somehow led to the best." "The Apache believe that nothing is purely good or evil," Nakohi replied. "Even poison plants contain medicine if you know how to use them." "And you knew," Clara said, understanding dawning. "From the beginning, you saw possibility where others saw only transaction." "I saw you," he corrected gently. Everything else followed from that. As they approached their home, not his cabin where she lived as property, but truly their home, built on choice and respect and hard-won love, Clara reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them here. A journey that had begun with her being sold like cattle and ended with her being valued beyond measure. A journey that had transformed two lost souls, caught between different worlds, into something new and beautiful that belonged wholly to both. A journey that was really only beginning.